So I'm so sorry about that, guys. I have no idea what just happened. We were talking, or I was talking about growing pains, and then I just got a notice saying that my Facebook tab, it just crashed. I don't know what happened, so I apologize for that. But I'm just going to kind of keep going with the topic, and like we all know, the video posts after we're done, so hopefully you'll be able to pick up where we left off and hear the rest of the video. So to keep talking about growing pains, I was talking about how it exists, how we need to make sure we're kind of keeping it in the back of our heads, especially dependent on the ages that we're working with. 8 to 10, 10 to 12, you know, kids tend to grow at different rates and different times. I would say the number one key the number one clue that a dancer could be experiencing growing pains is pain. They're going to say it hurts. Pain in both joints on both sides. It usually happens in the legs for most dancers, but usually it occurs in both sides. It might not be to the same degree, but more often it's happening in both sides. So they're going to say it's the sides of both of their feet, because the bottom portion of the fifth metatarsal down at the bottom of their pinkies tend to grow and yank on some of the muscles that attach there. They're going to say their heels hurt. It's going to be the backs of both of their heels. Again, one might be a little bit more sore, tender than the other, but it's usually both. They're going to say their knees hurt. Again, they're going to say it's both knees. One might be more than the other, but it's going to be both. More often than not, if they're saying that they're having a pain in a joint area, I'm going to specify, or I'm going to narrow it down, the sides of their feet, the heels, or their knees. And if they say it's both knees when you ask them, I would go ahead and just check with mom and dad and just say, hey, any chance, are they starting a growth spurt? Are they finishing one? Because a lot of times, like 9 times out of 10, that's usually what they're going through. More often than not, the symptoms subside when they stop growing, but I would just be really careful with jarring activities, jumping, running. I'd be careful with stretching in those areas, because we don't want to put too much stress on muscle tissue that's already being stressed, because what's happening, the reason that they're having the pain is the tendons are kind of going through an excessive amount of stretch, an excessive amount of tension and pull, because the bones are growing super fast, but the muscle tissue isn't lengthening up at the same rate. So the muscle tissue and the tendons that are attached between the muscle and the bone, there's a lot of tension and a lot of force being put or placed in that area. So again, look at how your dancers are moving, but if they're starting to talk about pain, again, side of the knee, heels, side of the feet, heels and knees, and they're saying it's on both sides, I would probably think growth spurt first and talk to the parents. Always feel free to shoot me messages if you have more questions about things, but I want to make sure that I made a point to mention that to the instructors, just so we keep that kind of back in the forefront of our mind as our kids are growing. Challenges of stretching has come up with talking with instructors, how to get their kids more flexible. So I just wanted to give you a couple of tips. Me personally, as a physical therapist and as a dance instructor, I'm a little bit more conservative in terms of my expectations for mobility for my dancers. I don't need my dancers to be extremely flexible. I like a nice flat traditional split. They can have a right or left split. I'm not super pressed about a center or middle split, because not all hips are created equal, friends. So they are composed, they are created differently. The ball and socket joint and the relationship can be different between dancers, and the amount of mobility inherent to those joints can be different between different dancers. So I don't want to necessarily put too much stress on a joint that might not be created to move that much. That being said, there are things that I believe can be worked on in terms of improving overall mobility of the joint and overall extensibility or lengthening of the muscle tissue. Aside from just your traditional stretching, which I'm not really a big proponent of static stretching, sitting in a straddle or sitting in a wall split or sitting in a butterfly. I tend to do things a lot more dynamically, so gently moving back and forth through the range of motion and trying to increase a little bit more range with each reach. Reduces the tension response that muscle tissue can have, the ability to kind of grip and hold on in the presence of pain. It also feels better to the student. So they don't have to sit there and kind of just sit in their pain and in their tight feeling, which is very discomforting. They can go at a very comfortable pace and work on extending that soft tissue in that degree. I also consider trunk stabilization or trunk strengthening. A lot of times, I was telling this to the parents, a lot of times, particularly with the hamstrings and the hip flexors, those muscles tend to grip and hang on for dear life because our trunk muscles are not strong and stable to do their job. So in the presence of weak trunks, the body goes to its two next in proximity. They go to the next two muscles that have anything to do with holding on to the trunk or holding on to the hips, and that tends to be the hamstrings and the hip flexors. So if you have a kid that's struggling with splits, you might want to take a look at their trunk strength and stability, because it might be that the body is using the hamstrings and the hip flexors to create abdominal or create trunk strength and stability, because the actual muscles that are supposed to be doing it aren't strong enough to do it yet. A little dabble in fascial tissue, the fascial system. It's not an easy concept to understand. I will say working dynamically with your stretching can help reduce the tension of fascia. A good old-fashioned tennis ball. I prefer spiky dryer balls, those dryer balls that they put in the dryer to, I don't even know what they're really supposed to do, get out wrinkles? I don't know. But they're air-filled, so you can compress them a little bit, but they're made out of plastic and they got little spikes on them. I like those better than the tennis balls. So spiky dryer balls gently into the bottom of the foot can help relieve a little bit of fascial tension, which has been connected to relieving some tension along the hamstring line. So aside from just having your kids plop in a split and hold it for 30 seconds and they're sweating and well, no, they're not sweating. They don't sweat. They're kind of grimacing and their arms are getting tired and they're falling all over the place, which can open the door for a lot of other types of injuries and micro tears. Have them work dynamically. Take a look at their trunk stability and strength. Make sure that the trunk muscles are doing its job so it can reduce the tension that there might be held in the larger hip muscles. Look loosely, don't get too deep into it, but look a little bit at the fascial system. Work with dynamic stretching a little bit more than just the static stretching to see if that helps. I will say, in terms of back mobility, working with rotation, back and forth, utilizing muscle tension, having them actually use their muscles to rotate as far as possible, side to side, can help with students who have limited trunk extension or have difficulty getting into a back bend. So that's my fourth point. Tight backs, work on a little bit more rotation. Tight hips, look dynamically, look at trunk stability, look a little bit at the fascial system, work dynamically. So hopefully those are some tips to overcome the challenges of stretching. Let's see. Next question. Somebody a couple of days ago asked me about like the best or my favorite stabilization exercises. In a general sense, my favorite stabilization exercises are those that closely or as best as possible mimic the movements or the positions that dancers do. If you've ever worked with me or if you've seen any of my videos, a good example of this is a prone plank or even a face up lift into a plank, and releasing one leg, drawing it up into a retere position. Because how many things do we do that require one, single leg balance and stability, and two, the working leg drawn up into a retere. So that's an example of a very easy activity that is a little bit more functionally focused. Again, focused on a position or a movement that can directly relate into dance. So just giving another tip, increasing or ideas for stabilization activities, I would focus on function first. Look at the movements that you want to help them with, and look at activities that might be more held in those functional positions. If you're not as experienced creating those activities, I do have my conditioning on the go cards. If you haven't seen those, you can go to my website, ansfptdance.com, and I'll make sure that I'm actually gonna put it right here. I hope I didn't lose anybody, because I just kind of clicked off my screen for a second trying to comment in my comment box. But ANSFPT Dance, I have my level 1 and level 2 conditioning cards, which have some really good functionally based stabilization and strengthening activities for dancers. So if you haven't checked that out, take a look at that. Other than that, I'm going to scroll through really quickly and just make sure I have touched on everybody's questions. I think I've answered everything, so got a couple minutes left. I'll share this with you. One of the parents asked, and I told them in that video that I just did, or the live chat that I just did with the parents, it was probably the hardest question that I had. A parent asked me, what inspires me? And my first response was, for anybody who knows me, I have a very logical, objective, bullet point frame of mind and frame of thought, even though I come from an artistic and dance background. So I've been thinking about it a lot because I don't really think in terms of inspiration. But I kind of turn the question around, or kind of morph the question to ask myself, why do I do what I do? Or why did I create my business? Or why am I allowing it to grow into teacher training and professional development, or virtual sessions that I can work with somebody across the country or across the world? Or why am I putting more emphasis into my group classes for students? And I think first what comes to mind is a sense of duty. Combining my knowledge as a physical therapist and my background as a dance instructor, there are a good number of us, but there still aren't a lot of us that have that combined knowledge. I still teach, and I think that's very important because I still want to have a hand and first-hand experience working with dancers across the spectrum, recreational dancers, or more serious and pre-professional dancers, all the way up to working with dancers in professional companies. I think what inspires me is just knowing that there's still a need for somebody to understand what dancers go through. I think there's still a need for somebody, when a dancer is injured, to tell the dancer and the parent and the teacher that there are ways to keep dancers safely and appropriately dancing through an injury, or through the injury journey or injury process. I know that there's nothing more defeating than for a dancer to go to a doctor and just have the doctor say, oh, well, just take 2 or 3 weeks off. That's like death to us. And so having somebody with the knowledge of the body and the knowledge of the industry and the community that they work within to come and tell them, we want to be safe and we want to be appropriate, but does that mean you completely have to sit out of everything? Well, let's discuss that. at least to have the ability to have that discussion is what kind of inspires me to have the ability to make myself and my resources available to help, whether it's the student or the parent or the instructor or the studio owner, to get better answers to help their dancers. I think is kind of why I created my business, and hopefully what has turned into my inspiration. So again, 30 minutes goes so super fast. So I want to thank all of you guys who have tuned in. I want to thank everybody who's going to watch the video. It'll post up onto my personal page. It'll post up to my business page and my YouTube page. You guys know how to get a hold of me. You can shoot me a message if you have any more questions. Other than that, you can check out my website at ansfptdance.com for all of my resources, all of the services that I offer, and just keep an eye out. I'm going to be posting more videos, more commentaries, just to help guide you guys to instructing and working with happy and healthy dancers. So, good night. Have a great evening.